Have you ever felt invisible? Like you were screaming for help, but the world just walked right past you? For Isolde Sterling, invisibility wasn't just a feeling. It was survival. Starved, abused, and forced to serve champagne at the very ball where she should have been a guest, Izzy was at her breaking point. But fate has a twisted sense of humor. Just as her body gave up, she didn't hit the cold marble floor. She fell into the arms of the one man feared by every wolf in the kingdom, Alpha King Kaelin Varric, and when the world expected him to throw her aside, he snarled, "Mine." This is the story of a broken girl, a ruthless king, and the secret that could destroy them both. The grand hall of the Silver Pine Pack was a cathedral of ice and gold. Crystal chandeliers, massive enough to crush a man, hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a fractured, diamond-like light over the hundreds of guests below. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roasted venison, and the heavy, musky pheromones of high-ranking wolves on the prowl for a mate. For Isolde Izzy Sterling, however, the air smelled only of the food she wasn't allowed to eat. Izzy adjusted the heavy silver tray balanced on her left hand. Her wrist trembled. She had been standing for 6 hours straight, navigating the sea of silk gowns and tuxedos, offering champagne to people who looked through her as if she were made of glass. She was 20 years old. She should have been wearing a gown of emerald green to match her eyes. She should have been dancing. Instead, she was wearing a scratchy, oversized server's uniform that hung loosely off her gaunt frame. "More champagne, girl. Don't just stand there gaping." The voice belonged to Beta Harlan, a man with a face like a bulldog and a personality to match. Izzy lowered her head, a reflex beaten into her over the last decade. "Yes, sir. Immediately, sir." Her voice was a dry rasp. She hadn't eaten in 48 hours. 2 days ago, her stepsister, Clarissa Miller, had spilled red wine on a white carpet and blamed it on Izzy. Her stepmother, Jana, had locked Izzy in the cellar without food as punishment. She had only been let out tonight because the catering staff was short-handed, and Jana wanted the extra credits for Izzy's labor. Izzy moved through the crowd, her vision tunneling. The noise of the ball, the laughter, the clinking glasses, the string quartet sounded distant, like it was coming from underwater. Just 1 more hour, she told herself, biting her lip until the metallic tang of blood woke her senses slightly. 1 more hour, then I can sneak the leftovers from the kitchen. Suddenly the music stopped. The hush that fell over the room was instant and terrifying. The heavy oak doors at the top of the grand staircase groaned open. A herald stepped forward, but no announcement was needed. The sheer weight of the power rolling into the room made wolves whimper and lower their gazes. It was him, King Kaelin Varric. He stood at the top of the stairs, a figure carved from midnight and violence. He was taller than any alpha present, his shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the 7 territories he ruled. He wore a tuxedo that cost more than Izzy's life was worth, but he wore it with the careless disdain of a predator forced into human clothing. His hair was black, swept back from a face that was devastatingly handsome, but cold as the winter outside. Beside him stood his second, Beta Silas, a man with kind eyes who looked perpetually worried. Kaelin didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply descended the stairs, his eyes scanning the crowd with a predatory intensity. He was looking for something, or someone. Izzy felt a strange pull in her chest. It started as a warmth, a tiny ember in the freezing void of her hunger. As Kaelin moved closer to the floor, the ember flared into a bonfire. Smoky wood, rain, and ozone. The scent hit Izzy with the force of a physical blow. It was the most intoxicating thing she had ever smelled. It made her mouth water, her wolf, dormant and silent for years, stir deep within her soul. "Mate," her wolf whispered. It was a weak, pathetic sound, but it was there. Izzy froze. No, it wasn't possible. She was a runt, a servant, the daughter of a traitor, or so Jana claimed. The king couldn't be her mate. The king was a monster who executed traitors before breakfast. She tried to turn away, to flee back to the safety of the kitchen, but her legs refused to cooperate. The hunger, combined with the sudden, overwhelming surge of the mating bond, was too much for her frail body. The room began to spin. The chandeliers blurred into streaks of light. Kaelin was walking through the parted crowd, heading straight towards the VIP section. He stopped abruptly. His head snapped to the left. His nostrils flared. Izzy saw his eyes lock onto her. They were grey, storm grey. For a second, time suspended. The king of all lichens was staring at a malnourished server girl holding a tray of half-empty champagne flutes. Izzy's knees buckled. The darkness rushed in from the edges of her vision, swallowing the light. She swayed, the heavy tray slipping from her numb fingers. She waited for the crash of glass. She waited for the pain of hitting the floor. Neither came. Instead, a blur of motion tore through the space between them. Strong arms, hard as iron, wrapped around her waist and shoulders. The impact of his body against hers sent a shockwave of electricity through her that was so intense it hurt. The tray hit the floor, shattering into 1,000 diamonds. Champagne soaked the hem of Kaelin's trousers, but he didn't flinch. "Got you," a deep voice rumbled against her ear. It vibrated through her chest, terrifying and comforting all at once. Izzy looked up, her eyelids heavy. Kaelin's face was inches from hers. Up close, he wasn't just cold, he was intense, his pupils blown wide, eclipsing the grey irises. He looked at her not with disgust, but with a confusion that bordered on panic. "Mate!" Kaelin growled, the word ripping out of his throat loud enough for the entire silent hall to hear. A collective gasp went through the room. "She attacked him!" someone shrieked. It sounded like Clarissa. "That server girl attacked the king." "Security!" Beta Silas barked, moving forward. 2 large guards rushed toward them, reaching out to grab Izzy and pull her away from the king. "Get off him, you filth!" one guard shouted, reaching for Izzy's arm. Kaelin's reaction was instantaneous and lethal. He didn't just shout, he roared. A wave of pure alpha command exploded from him, knocking the 2 guards backward onto the floor as if they had been hit by a truck. The guests scrambled back, terrified. Kaelin pulled Izzy tighter against his chest, shielding her from the room. He bared his teeth at his own guards, his eyes flashing gold. "Touch her!" Kaelin snarled, his voice dropping to a demonic register. "And I will rip your throats out!" He looked down at the unconscious girl in his arms. She was light. Too light. She felt like a bird made of hollow bones. He could feel her ribs through the cheap fabric of her uniform. "She's starving," Kaelin whispered, the realization turning his blood to ice. He looked up, his gaze sweeping the room, landing on the terrified faces of the pack members. "Who is she? And why is my mate starving to death in your hall?" Silence. Absolute. Terrified. Silence. Then the darkness took Izzy completely. When Izzy woke, she didn't open her eyes immediately. The bed beneath her was too soft. The air smelled too clean. Antiseptic and lavender, overlaying that rich, stormy scent of ozone. She must be dead. That was the only explanation. Janna had finally killed her. And this was the afterlife. "Her heart rate is stabilizing, Your Majesty, but barely." The voice was male, clinical, and unfamiliar. "Explain the toxicity levels, Aris. Now." That voice. Izzy flinched. It was the low rumble that had vibrated through her before the darkness. The king. She snapped her eyes open and immediately regretted it. The room was dimly lit, but luxurious beyond comprehension. Dark mahogany walls, velvet drapes, and medical equipment that hummed softly in the corner. She was hooked up to an IV drip. She tried to sit up, but a large hand gently pushed her shoulder back down. "Easy," King Kaelin said. He was sitting in a chair right beside the bed, his tuxedo jacket discarded, his dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms covered in faint scars. He looked exhausted and angry. "I'm sorry," Izzy stammered, her voice cracking. Panic surged. "I didn't mean to drop the tray. I'll pay for the glasses. Please don't send me back to the cellar. I'll work double shifts. Kaelin's face hardened, a muscle feathering in his jaw. He looked at the doctor, standing at the foot of the bed. Dr. Aris, a bespectacled man with a grim expression. Cellar? Kaelin repeated the word as if it were a curse. He turned his gaze back to Izzy, his expression softening slightly. You are not going back to any cellar. You are in the royal wing. Why? Izzy whispered. Because you are my mate, Kaelin said simply, as if it were a universal fact, like the sun rising in the east. Izzy shook her head weakly. I can't be. I'm a runt. I have no wolf. My stepmother says I'm defected. Dr. Aris stepped forward, checking the chart in his hand. That brings us to the blood work, Miss Sterling. You are not a runt, and you certainly aren't defected. Aris held up a small glass vial containing a shimmering blue liquid. Do you know what this is? Aris asked. Izzy shook her head. We found high concentrations of wolfsbane and silver nitrate in your blood, Aris said gravely, but not enough to kill you quickly. Just enough to keep you sick, to suppress your wolf's growth, to make you weak, docile, and unable to shift. Izzy stared at him. Poison? But I eat what everyone else eats. Well, the leftovers. Do you take any supplements? Kaelin asked, his voice tight. Vitamins? Medicine? Just the tonic, Izzy said, for my nervous disposition. Jana gives it to me every morning since I was 10. She says I inherited my father's madness. There was a loud crack. Izzy jumped. Kaelin had gripped the armrest of the wooden chair so hard he had splintered the solid oak. He stood up, pacing the room like a caged tiger. The air around him crackled with suppressed violence. She has been poisoning her, Kaelin growled to the doctor, ignoring Izzy for a moment. For 10 years, she chemically castrated her wolf. It appears so, sire, Aris said. The malnutrition exacerbated it. If she hadn't collapsed tonight, if the mate bond hadn't tried to force a shift that her body was too weak to handle, her heart would have stopped within the week. Kaelin stopped pacing. He turned to the window, looking out at the snowy night. Silas. The beta materialized from the shadows near the door. Sire, bring me Jana Miller, Kaelin said. His voice was devoid of emotion, which made it infinitely more terrifying. And her daughter. Bring them to the interrogation room. Do not let them speak to anyone. If they try to run, break their legs. Understood, Silas said, bowing and exiting the room. Kaelin turned back to the bed. He sat down again, taking Izzy's cold, rough hand in his own large, warm ones. The contact sent a soothing wave of heat up her arm. Who are you? Izzy asked softly. She knew what he was, but she didn't know who this man was. This man who looked at her hand like it was a precious artifact. I am Kaelin, he said, and I am going to burn the world down for what they did to you. But first, you need to eat. He reached for a bowl of broth on the side table. Aris says you have to start slow. Can you sit up? Izzy nodded, struggling. Kaelin didn't hesitate. He slid an arm behind her back, lifting her effortlessly, and adjusted the pillows. He held the spoon to her lips. Eat, he commanded gently. Izzy took a sip. It was warm, salty, and perfect. Tears pricked her eyes. She took another and another, until the bowl was empty. Rest now, Kaelin said, wiping a stray tear from her cheek with his thumb. I have some trash to take out. The interrogation room in the basement of the pack house was a stark contrast to the luxury of the royal wing. It was concrete, cold, and smelled of bleach and fear. Jana Miller sat at the metal table, her posture rigid. She was a beautiful woman in her 40s, with sharp features and hair dyed a harsh blonde. Beside her, Clarissa was sobbing loudly, her mascara running down her face. This is an outrage, Jana snapped as the heavy iron door opened. We are high-ranking members of this pack. You cannot treat us like criminals. My stepdaughter is a drug addict. She embarrassed the king, and I demand to see her, to discipline her. Kaelin walked in, followed by Silas. He didn't sit. He stood on the other side of the table looking down at Jana. A drug addict, Kaelin repeated calmly. Yes, Clarissa wailed. She's crazy. She takes pills. She steals food. She's a disgrace. Kaelin threw a file onto the table. It slid across the metal surface and hit Jana's hands. That contains the toxicology report from Dr. Aris, Kaelin said. It shows 10 years of systematic poisoning. Wolfsbane. Specifically, a strain used by the Obsidian Order. Jana's face paled slightly, but she recovered quickly. I don't know what you're talking about. The girl is sick. I gave her medicine to help her. The medicine suppressed her wolf, Kaelin said, leaning in. Why? Why suppress the wolf of a runt? Because she isn't a runt, Silas spoke up from the corner, checking a tablet. I just ran her lineage check. Kaelin, Isolde Sterling, daughter of Alpha Marcus Sterling. The room went deadly silent. Marcus Sterling had been a legendary alpha of the Northern Territories, known for his immense power and the rare white coat of his wolf form. He and his wife had died in a mysterious fire 12 years ago. Izzy had been the sole survivor, taken in by her distant cousin's wife, Jana. Alpha blood, Kaelin murmured. You were poisoning her to hide her alpha bloodline. Jana sneered, dropping the act. She is a genetic mistake, a threat to the stability of the region. Sterling was a warmonger. I did the world a favor by keeping her weak. You did it for the money, Kaelin corrected. As long as she was alive, but incapable, you controlled the Sterling Estate Trust. If she ascended as an alpha, you would lose everything. Jana stood up, slamming her hands on the table. You cannot prove anything. I am a member of the Council's auxiliary. I demand a lawyer. You are in my territory, Kaelin said, his voice dropping to a growl, and you harmed my mate. Jana froze. Her eyes went wide. Mate? That skinny little rat is your mate. She let out a sharp, cruel laugh. Oh, King Kaelin, you poor fool. Do you think the Council will accept her? A broken, abused girl with no education and a suppressed wolf. They will tear her apart, and they will tear you apart for choosing her over Lady Genevieve. Kaelin's eyes flashed gold. He reached across the table, grabbing Jana by the throat and lifting her off the ground. Clarissa screamed. Let the Council try, Kaelin snarled, but you won't be there to see it. Kaelin, Silas shouted, stepping forward. Not here. Not now. We need her alive. She mentioned the Obsidian Order. If she's working with them, we need intel. Kaelin's grip tightened. Jana clawed at his hand, gasping for air. Her eyes rolled back. Kaelin released her. She crumpled to the floor, coughing violently. Lock them up, Kaelin said, wiping his hand on a handkerchief as if he had touched something rotting. The deepest cells. If they speak to anyone, cut out their tongues. He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. Silas, double the guard on Izzy's room. Jana is right about one thing. The Council won't like this. And Lady Genevieve. Kaelin's expression darkened. Genevieve is going to be a problem. As they walked down the hallway, Silas lowered his voice. Genevieve has been campaigning for the Queen's title for 3 years, Kaelin. Her father leads the Council of Elders. If you reject her for a servant girl, it will cause a political uprising. Let it rise, Kaelin said, buttoning his jacket. I found my mate, and I'm not letting her go. Even if it means war? Silas asked. Kaelin stopped. He looked back toward the medical wing where Izzy lay sleeping. Especially if it means war. 3 days passed in a blur of soft linens and nutritious meals. For Izzy, the royal wing was a paradise, but it was also a cage. A very beautiful, very lonely cage. Kaelin visited her every few hours, but his visits were brief. He was a king at the brink of political turmoil, constantly pulled away by Beta Silas or the ringing of his secure phone. When he was there, he was intense, watching her eat with a hawk-like focus, growling low in his chest if she left anything on the plate. He touched her as if she were made of porcelain, brushing hair from her forehead, checking her pulse. But he never stayed long enough for them to truly talk. By the 4th morning, Izzy felt strong enough to walk around the room. Her reflection in the vanity mirror shocked her. The hollows in her cheeks were filling out slightly, and her skin had lost that translucent, greyish quality. But her eyes, they still looked haunted. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," Izzy called out, expecting the nurse with her midday tonic. The door opened, but it wasn't a nurse. A woman glided into the room. She was breathtaking, tall, with cascading auburn hair and curves accentuated by a tailored red pantsuit that probably cost more than the house Izzy grew up in. She carried a basket of exotic fruits. "Isolde, isn't it?" the woman said, her voice like warm honey. "I'm Lady Genevieve. I've heard so much about the unfortunate circumstances of your arrival." Izzy stiffened. She knew the name. The staff whispered it in the hallways. The future queen. The king's perfect match. "Lady Genevieve," Izzy dipped her head, old habits of servitude kicking in. "It's an honor." "Oh, stop," Genevieve laughed, waving a manicured hand. She set the basket down and sat on the edge of the bed, uninvited. No bowing. We're practically sisters now. After all, we both care deeply for Kaelin. She said his name with a familiarity that made Izzy's chest ache. "I brought you these," Genevieve said, gesturing to the fruit. "And to check on you. The whole pack is in an uproar, you know. They're saying Kaelin has gone mad." Izzy flinched. "Mad? Well," Genevieve sighed, her expression full of faux sympathy. "You have to understand the optics, sweetie. Kaelin is the Alpha King. He needs a queen who can stand beside him, run the council, and bear strong heirs. And you—" She looked Izzy up and down, her gaze lingering on her frail wrists. "You're a survivor. It's noble of him to protect you. He has such a savior complex. He always picks up stray things." Stray things. The words cut deeper than any knife. "He called me his mate," Izzy whispered, her voice trembling. "Did he?" Genevieve tilted her head. "Or did he feel the bond and panic? Biology is a funny thing, Isolde. Sometimes nature pairs an alpha with a weaker wolf to balance the population. But a king can't afford balance. He needs power. If he chooses you, the council will revolt. He'll lose his crown. Did he tell you that?" Izzy's blood ran cold. He'll lose his crown. Kaelin hadn't mentioned that. He had just held her hand and told her to eat. "I don't want him to lose anything," Izzy said, tears stinging her eyes. "I know you don't," Genevieve soothed, reaching out to pat Izzy's hand. Her skin was cold. "That's why I'm here, to help you see the reality. Kaelin is too honorable to send you away. He'll destroy himself trying to fix you. The question is, do you love him enough to let him go?" Before Izzy could answer, the heavy oak door slammed open. "Genevieve!" The name was a warning shot. Kaelin stood in the doorway, and he looked murderous. His suit jacket was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and his chest was heaving. The air in the room instantly grew heavy, pressurized by his fury. Genevieve stood up gracefully, smoothing her pantsuit. "Kaelin, I was just welcoming our guest." "Get out," Kaelin snarled. He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on Izzy's pale face. "I was only trying to help." "I said get out," Kaelin roared, his voice shaking the glass panes in the windows. "If you ever come near her again without my permission, I will forget that your father is the council head, and I will banish you to the wastelands." Genevieve's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She shot a look of pure venom at Izzy, then curtsied mockingly to the king. "As you wish, your majesty." She swept out of the room. Kaelin slammed the door shut and locked it. He turned to Izzy, marching across the room. "What did she say to you?" he demanded. Izzy backed away, hitting the vanity table. "She told me the truth, that I'm going to ruin you." "She lied," Kaelin said, closing the distance. He trapped her against the table, placing his hands on either side of her hips. "She didn't!" Izzy cried, the dam breaking. "Look at me, Kaelin, I'm broken. I can't shift. I don't know how to be a queen. I spent my life scrubbing floors." "You're a king." You need someone like her. Someone strong. I don't want strong, Kaelin shouted back, his composure cracking. I want you. He grabbed her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. His grey eyes were swirling with gold. Do you know how long I waited? He whispered roughly. 28 years. I have conquered territories. I have killed enemies. I have sat on a throne of ice, alone. I thought I had no soul until I smelled you in that hallway. But I'll cost you your throne, Izzy sobbed. Then let them take it, Kaelin swore. I would burn this kingdom to ash before I let you go. You are not a stray, Isolde. You are the other half of my soul. Do you understand? He didn't wait for an answer. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, possessive, and consuming. It tasted of rain and ozone and raw need. For the first time in her life, Izzy didn't feel invisible. She felt like the center of the universe. As his lips moved against hers, something deep inside her chest, that dormant, poisoned part of her, fluttered. A spark, a tiny, golden spark of power. Kaelin pulled back, breathless, his forehead resting against hers. Promise me you won't listen to her. Promise me. I promise, Izzy whispered. But as she held on to him, the fear didn't leave, because she knew Genevieve was right about one thing. The council was coming, and love might not be enough to stop them. The summons came 2 days later. It was a black envelope, sealed with the wax crest of the High Council. Kaelin had tried to hide it, but Izzy saw the look on Beta Silas's face. It was time. The tribunal was held in the Hall of Ancestors, a circular stone chamber deep beneath the palace. It was a place of judgment, where laws had been written in blood for centuries. Izzy wore a dress Kaelin had commissioned for her, midnight blue velvet with long sleeves and a high neck, designed to hide her thinness and make her look regal. She held her head high, but inside, she was shaking. Kaelin walked beside her, his hand gripping hers so tight her knuckles were white. He wore his formal ceremonial armor, black leather and silver plating. He looked like a god of war. They entered the chamber. 12 elders sat on a raised stone dais in a semicircle. In the center sat Lord Davenport, Genevieve's father. He was a man with a face like dried parchment and eyes like flint. The gallery behind them was packed with alphas from other packs, whispering and craning their necks to see the runt queen. King Kaelin, Lord Davenport began, his voice echoing off the stone walls. You have brought a stranger into our inner circle. A woman of questionable lineage and evident physical weakness. She is my mate, Kaelin stated, his voice calm but dangerous. Her lineage is sterling. Her father was Arthur Sterling. Murmurs erupted in the crowd. Arthur Sterling was a madman, Davenport spat. He burned down his own estate. His blood is tainted. And this girl, look at her. She cannot even shift. We have reports from your own physician that she is chemically compromised. Because she was poisoned, Kaelin retorted, by a member of this pack, Janna Miller. Hearsay, Davenport dismissed. Janna Miller claims she was treating the girl for psychosis. But that is irrelevant. The law of lichens is clear, Kaelin. A king cannot mate with a wolf who cannot shift. It weakens the bloodline. It endangers the pack. Davenport stood up, pointing a gnarled finger at Izzy. We demand you reject her. Take Lady Genevieve as your chosen mate. She is strong. She is of pure blood. Kaelin let go of Izzy's hand and stepped forward. A low growl vibrated in the air, causing the torches on the walls to flicker. I will not reject her. Then you forfeit the crown, Davenport said simply. Unless, he paused, a cruel smile playing on his lips, unless she can prove she is worthy, invoking the right of the moon. The room gasped. Beta Silas stepped forward, looking horrified. The right is a trial by combat against a shifted wolf. She is human in form. It would be an execution, not a trial. It is the law, Davenport shouted. If she wants to be a wolf queen, she must prove she has a wolf. She must survive 3 minutes in the ring with a challenger of our choosing. "I will take her place," Kaelin snarled. "You cannot," Davenport said. "The Queen must stand on her own legs." Kaelin was vibrating with rage. He was about to tear Davenport's head off. Izzy could feel the violence rolling off him in waves. If he attacked the council, it would be civil war. Thousands would die. Izzy looked at Kaelin. She saw the desperation in his eyes. He was ready to lose everything for her. She couldn't let him do that. Izzy stepped forward, her velvet dress rustling in the silence. Her legs were shaking, but her voice was surprisingly steady. "I accept." Kaelin spun around. "Izzy, no, you can't. You don't have your wolf yet. They will kill you." "If I don't, you lose your crown," she whispered to him. "I won't be the reason you fall." She turned to Davenport. "I accept the right of the moon." "When?" Davenport's eyes glittered with triumph. He looked at Genevieve, who was standing in the shadows of the gallery, smiling. "Tonight," Davenport said, "at high moon, and the challenger will be Lady Genevieve." The holding cell beneath the arena was a place where hope went to die. The walls were weeping with damp moss, and the air hung heavy with the copper tang of old blood and the ammonia scent of fear. Izzy sat on the edge of a splintered wooden bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to stop them from shaking. Above her, muffled by feet of concrete and stone, she could hear the rhythmic stomping of thousands of feet. The crowd was ready. They were thirsty for blood. Her blood. Beta Silas stood on the other side of the iron bars. For the first time since Izzy had met him, the stoic Beta looked rattled. He checked his watch for the 10th time in a minute. "Kaelin is fighting the guards to get down here," Silas whispered, his voice strained. "But the council has invoked the ancient rites. If he interferes before the bell rings, they strip him of his alpha command immediately. The pack link would sever. It would be chaos, Izzy." "Tell him to stay where he is," Izzy said, her voice small but steady in the gloom. "He can't lose the pack for me. He was born to be king. I was just a momentary lapse." "You are his mate," Silas argued fiercely. "There is no momentary in that." Before he could say more, the heavy door at the end of the corridor groaned open. 2 guards marched in. They wore the standard uniforms of the Royal Guard, but their eyes were cold, devoid of the usual loyalty one expected in the king's service. "Time," one guard grunted. He held a tin cup in his hand. "Water for the prisoner. Council regulations. Hydrate before the slaughter." He shoved the cup through the slot in the bars. Silas narrowed his eyes but stepped back. "Drink, Izzy. You'll need the strength." Izzy picked up the cup. Her throat was parched, sandpaper dry from nerves. She didn't think. She just wanted relief. She tipped the cup back and drained it in a single, desperate gulp. It didn't taste like water. The liquid was thick, oily, and tasted of metallic ash, like sucking on a rusted coin. Izzy dropped the cup. It hit the stone floor with a hollow clang that echoed like a gunshot. "That," she gasped, clutching her throat. "That wasn't water." The guard smirked, leaning close to the bars. On the side of his neck, just visible above his collar, was a tattoo in black ink, a jagged shard of volcanic glass, the mark of the Obsidian Order. "Compliments of the future queen," the guard whispered, his breath smelling of stale tobacco. "She wanted to make sure you didn't suffer too long." The pain hit Izzy a second later. It wasn't a stomachache, it was an incineration. It felt as though she had swallowed molten lead. The liquid fire raced through her veins, searing every nerve ending, boiling her blood. Izzy collapsed to her knees, a silent scream trapped in her constricting throat. "What did you give her?" Silas roared, slamming his body against the bars. "Open this door!" "Let's go," the guard said to his partner, ignoring the Beta. They unlocked the cell, grabbed Izzy by her arms, and dragged her out. Her legs were useless, dead weight trailing behind her on the rough stone. Inside Izzy's body, a chemical war was raging. The obsidian poison was designed to stop the heart of a human within minutes. But Izzy wasn't just human. Deep in her marrow, Hidden by a decade of wolfsbane and suppressants, her wolf lay dormant. The new poison didn't kill her. It acted like a sledgehammer smashing into a glass wall. The toxic shock slammed into the layers of old wolfsbane, igniting a violent reaction. The suppressants that had kept her weak, that had caged her inner beast, were being burned away by the sheer corrosiveness of the assassin's brew. The pain was blinding, white-hot and absolute. It felt like her bones were dissolving and reforming, knitting together in ways that defied biology. The iron gates of the arena screeched open. "The challenger!" The announcer's voice boomed, magnified by speakers. "Isolde Sterling!" The guards threw her onto the sand. She landed hard, the grit scraping her cheek. The light was blinding. Floodlights positioned to illuminate every drop of blood for the hungry spectators. Through the haze of agony, Izzy looked up. The arena was a coliseum of noise. Jeers, whistles, and booing rained down on her. But her eyes found the royal box. Kalen was there, but he wasn't sitting. He was thrashing against 4 elite enforcers. Heavy chains, glowing with a dull, magical suppression hum, were wrapped around his chest and arms. He was screaming her name, but the sound was lost in the roar of the crowd. His eyes were bleeding gold, the alpha power surging against the silver restraints, burning his skin smoke black. He loves me, Izzy thought, a tear cutting through the dust on her face. He really loves me. Across the arena, the crowd erupted into cheers. Lady Genevieve stepped out. She looked glorious and terrible. She wore a silk robe which she discarded with a flourish. She cracked her neck, her eyes locking onto Izzy's prone form with predatory delight. "Die, you little rat," Genevieve mouthed. With a sickening crunch of reshuffling anatomy, Genevieve shifted. Her human form twisted, elongated, and sprouted fur. In seconds, a massive russet-colored wolf stood on the sand. She was large, sleek, and built for killing. She snarled, saliva dripping from her jaws, and dug her claws into the sand, preparing to launch. Izzy tried to crawl backward, but her body was convulsing. The fire inside her had reached her core. It was unbearable. She wanted to die just to make it stop. "Get up!" The voice didn't come from the crowd. It didn't come from Kalen. It echoed from the deepest, darkest recess of her own soul. It was a voice ancient as the mountains, cold as the winter wind, and furious. I said, "Get up." Genevieve launched herself. She was a blur of brown fur and white teeth, flying through the air, aiming straight for Izzy's exposed throat. Izzy squeezed her eyes shut. "Now!" the voice roared. Something inside Izzy snapped. A dam broke. A decade of hunger, abuse, silence, and poison funneled into a single point of singularity. Izzy screamed. But it wasn't the scream of a girl. It was a sonic boom. A shockwave of blinding, iridescent white energy exploded from her body. It hit the mid-air Genevieve like a freight train, blasting the russet wolf backward 30 feet. Genevieve smashed into the stone perimeter wall with a bone-shattering thud and slid down, whimpering. The entire stadium went deathly silent. The floodlights flickered and burst. In the center of the arena, the dust swirled in a vortex. Within that vortex, a silhouette was rising. It wasn't human. The sound of bones breaking was loud enough to be heard in the cheap seats. But this wasn't the sound of injury. It was the sound of armor plating, locking into place. The dust settled. Standing where the frail girl had been was a wolf. But this was no ordinary wolf. She was gargantuan, easily a head taller than even the largest alpha males. Her fur was not merely white, it was pearlescent, shimmering with an inner light that seemed to warp the air around her. Her paws were the size of dinner plates, tipped with claws that looked like obsidian daggers. She shook her massive head, sending a spray of white sparks into the air. Slowly the beast opened her eyes. They were not green. They were not gold. They were a deep, glowing violet. The mark of the apex, the mark of the original bloodline that the legend said had died out centuries ago. In the royal box, Kalen stopped fighting. He stared, his mouth slightly open, tears streaming down his face. The chains that held him seemed insignificant now. The white wolf let out a growl. It was a low, vibrating thrum that shook the teeth of everyone in the stands. It was a sound that triggered a primal instinct in every lichen present. Submit. Genevieve, broken and bleeding against the wall, tried to stand. She bared her teeth in a pathetic attempt at defiance. The white wolf didn't even run. She simply blurred. 1 second she was in the center of the arena. The next, she was towering over Genevieve. With a casual, almost dismissive swipe of her paw, she pinned the russet wolf to the ground. She lowered her massive muzzle, her violet eyes burning with intelligence and judgment. She didn't kill her. She didn't need to. She had already erased Genevieve's existence as a threat. Instead, the white wolf lifted her head. She ignored the cheering crowd. She ignored the cameras. She turned her gaze upward, locking onto the stone balcony of the council elders. She looked at Lord Davenport, who was clutching the railing, his face the color of spoiled milk. The white wolf crouched, her hind legs bunching with terrifying power. She wasn't finished. The trial wasn't over. The hunt had just begun. The stone barrier separating the arena sand from the council's VIP dais was 3 feet thick, reinforced with steel rebar and ancient warding spells. It was designed to withstand the charge of a standard alpha. It did not withstand the white wolf. Izzy didn't just jump. She ascended. Her massive hind legs coiled like springs, launching her white, iridescent form into the air. She hit the stone wall with the force of a falling meteor. The impact sent a spiderweb of cracks shooting through the masonry, followed instantly by an explosion of dust and rubble. Screams erupted from the council members. Lord Davenport scrambled backward, tripping over his ceremonial robes, his face a mask of absolute terror. In the royal box above, the sight of his mate breaching the defences shattered the last of Kaelin's restraint. The silver chains holding him burned his skin, sizzling against his flesh. But he didn't care. With a roar that sounded more dragon than wolf, Kaelin flexed his arms. The heavy bolts anchoring the chains to the concrete wall groaned, bent, and finally ripped free. Kaelin vaulted over the railing, dropping 20 feet to land on the dais beside Izzy. He shifted mid-air. His wolf was a giant, midnight black beast, a shadow to Izzy's light. Together they stood on the ruins of the wall, night and day, the king and the apex, staring down the treacherous council. "Guards!" Davenport shrieked, crawling on his hands and knees. "Kill them! They are abominations!" The guards stationed around the dais hesitated. They looked at the terrified old man, and then they looked at the 2 massive wolves growling in unison, their energies swirling together, shadow and starlight. But the Obsidian Order agents disguised as regular security didn't hesitate. 12 men pulled jagged blades dripping with the same poison they had given Izzy and charged. The ballroom erupted into chaos. The audience in the upper tiers panicked, scrambling for the exits, while others, loyal alphas who recognized the treachery, began to jump into the pit to assist their king. Kaelin moved to intercept the first attacker, his jaws snapping the man's arm like a twig. But he was distracted, constantly looking back to protect Izzy, assuming she was still the fragile girl he had fed soup to yesterday. He was wrong. An assassin lunged at Izzy's flank. Before Kaelin could react, Izzy spun with impossible speed. She didn't bite. She slammed her body into the attacker, the sheer mass of her wolf form crushing his ribs. She then whipped her head around, catching another attacker by the vest and hurling him across the dais into the stone pillars. Her violet eyes glowed with intelligence and fury. She wasn't fighting like a novice. She was fighting on instinct, tapping into the genetic memory of the Sterling bloodline. Warriors who had defended the North for centuries. Kaelin felt a surge of pride so intense it nearly knocked him over. "Mine," his wolf howled. "Queen." They fought back to back, a whirlwind of teeth and claws. The Obsidian agents fell one by one, their silver weapons useless against the overwhelming power of the bonded pair. When the dust settled, only Lord Davenport remained. He was backed against the heavy iron doors, trembling. The white wolf stalked toward him, her lips pulled back to reveal teeth that were lethally sharp, A low, vibrating growl emanated from her chest, shaking the floorboards. Kaelin shifted back to human form first. He was naked, covered in dust and the blood of his enemies, but he looked every inch the king. He walked over to a fallen guard, ripped a cloak off him, and tied it around his waist. Then he turned to Davenport. "You tried to kill her," Kaelin said, his voice deadly quiet. "You poisoned her. You rigged the rite." "It was for the good of the pack," Davenport stammered, sweat pouring down his pale face. "The Sterling line is cursed. She is too powerful. You see it, don't you? She is an apex. She will challenge your authority." Kaelin looked at the massive white wolf. Izzy lowered her head, nudging Kaelin's hand gently with her wet nose. The violet fire in her eyes softened into adoration. "She doesn't challenge my authority," Kaelin said, resting his hand on her thick fur. "She completes it." Kaelin signaled to Beta Silas, who had fought his way through the crowd to the dais. "Arrest him," Kaelin commanded, "and arrest Lady Genevieve. She is still in the pit." Silas nodded, his face grim. "And the charge, sire?" "High treason," Kaelin said, "attempted regicide, and crimes against the crown." As the guards dragged a weeping Davenport away, a hush fell over the arena. The remaining spectators, the other alphas, and the pack members stood frozen. Slowly the white wolf began to change. The iridescent fur receded, the bones shifted with a series of wet cracks, and the massive beast shrank down. Kaelin was there instantly. He caught Izzy as she shifted back into her human form. She was naked, shivering, and covered in the dust of the arena, but she was conscious. He wrapped his large arms around her, pulling her against his chest to shield her from the eyes of the crowd. "I got you," he whispered into her hair, echoing the words he had said the night they met. Izzy looked up at him. Her eyes were no longer violet, but they were a brighter, more vibrant green than before. "Did we win?" she rasped. Kaelin kissed her forehead, tears of relief mingling with the sweat on his face. "Yes, Izzy, we won." He stood up, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. He turned to face the silent crowd. "Behold!" Kaelin's voice boomed, amplified by the acoustics of the stone chamber. "Your queen, Isolde Sterling of the Northern Territories, the White Wolf!" For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then Beta Silas dropped to one knee. "Long live the Queen!" It rippled through the arena like a wave. One by one, every alpha, every omega, every guard dropped to their knees, baring their necks in submission. "Long live the Queen! Long live the Queen!" The chant grew until it shook the foundations of the palace. Izzy buried her face in Kaelin's neck and wept. She wasn't crying from sadness. She was crying because, for the first time in her life, she was seen, she was safe, and she was home. 3 months later. The winter snow had melted, revealing the lush green valleys of the Silver Pine territory. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and wildflowers. The Sterling estate, once a burned-out ruin, was bustling with construction crews. Kaelin had insisted on restoring it, not as a place for them to live. They would stay in the palace, but as a sanctuary for orphaned wolves and those who had been cast out, just as Izzy had been. Izzy stood on the balcony of the royal palace, overlooking the gardens. She wore a dress of soft cream silk that hugged her curves that were now healthy and full. Her hair shone in the sunlight, and her skin glowed with vitality. She felt a pair of strong arms wrap around her waist from behind. She leaned back into the solid warmth of her mate. "You're thinking too loud," Kaelin murmured, kissing the sensitive spot behind her ear. "I was just thinking about Jana," Izzy said softly. The trial had been swift. Jana Miller and her daughter Clarissa had been stripped of their titles and assets. They were currently serving a life sentence in the labor camps of the southern border. Ironic, considering how they had forced Izzy to labor for them. Lord Davenport and the leaders of the Obsidian Order had been executed for treason. "They can never hurt you again," Kaelin said firmly, tightening his hold. You are the most powerful wolf on this continent, Izzy. Sometimes I think you could take me in a fight." Izzy turned in his arms, looping her hands around his neck. She smiled, a playful glint in her green eyes. "Only sometimes?" Kaelin chuckled, a deep, rich sound that he made much more often these days. "Okay, most of the time. But don't tell the beta." He grew serious, his grey eyes searching hers. "Are you happy, Izzy? Truly?" Izzy looked at the man who had saved her, the man who had looked at a starving server girl and seen a queen. "I didn't know what happiness was," she admitted. "I thought life was just surviving, enduring. But this," she touched his cheek, "this is living." Kaelin leaned his forehead against hers. "I have a surprise for you." "Another one?" Izzy raised an eyebrow. "You already bought me a library." "Better." Kaelin took her hand and placed it on her own stomach. He covered her hand with his large one. "Dr. Aris got the blood work back this morning," Kaelin whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "The poison didn't just wake up your wolf, Izzy. It cleared everything out. You're healing. Perfectly." Izzy stared at him, her heart skipping a beat. "You mean, we're going to have a pup?" Kaelin smiled, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "A forceful, stubborn, probably violet-eyed pup." Izzy gasped, looking down at her flat stomach. "A baby, a family, a real family, where no one would ever be locked in a cellar, where no one would ever go hungry. A pup," she whispered. Tears spilled over her cheeks. Kaelin kissed them away. "I love you, Isolde, my mate, my queen." "I love you, Kaelin," she whispered back. Below them in the garden, the pack was gathering for the spring equinox festival. Music was starting to play. Children were running on the grass. Izzy looked out at her kingdom. She had collapsed at a ball, broken and invisible. She had risen as a queen, loved and feared. She took Kaelin's hand, interlacing their fingers. "Ready to go down?" Kaelin asked. Izzy took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of pine, rain, and her mate. "Yes," she said, stepping forward into the light. "I'm ready." And that is the incredible story of Isolde and King Kaelin. From the depths of despair to the height of power, Izzy proved that true strength isn't just about claws and fangs. It's about the spirit that refuses to break. She found a love that didn't just save her, but empowered her to save herself. What did you think of the twist with the white wolf? Did you expect Lady Genevieve to get what she deserved? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of romance, betrayal, and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. We have a dark academia vampire romance coming up next week that you do not want to miss. Thanks for listening. And remember, even when the world ignores you, there is a king or queen inside you waiting to roar. See you next time.